That picker bush. David had always been a curious child, but ever since Roger went missing, his curiosity had turned to dread. The small patch of scrubby, thorny bushes at the corner of his yard, just beyond the rusted fence, had always seemed a little strange. It was the kind of place that made you squint, like you were seeing something you weren't supposed to. But after that night, after Roger disappeared, David knew with certainty, there was something wrong with that bush. It wasn't just the way the branches twisted, like gnarled fingers reaching out for something, or someone. No, it was more than that. It was the way the bush seemed to move in the wind, but not in the way that bushes usually do. It was too slow, like it was waiting. And now that Roger was gone, David couldn't shake the feeling that the picker bush, just an ordinary patch of thorny underbrush, his mother had always called it, was alive. David's mind kept going back to the day, the last time he saw Roger. It had been just after school, a warm Friday afternoon. They'd been hanging out at David's house, playing video games, eating chips, talking about whatever dumb thing boys that age talk about. It had been just a normal day, the kind of day you don't think will ever change. Until it did. Roger had been standing in the front yard, tying his sneakers. His backpack lay on the ground beside him. David had been leaning against the porch railing, trying to convince Roger to stay a little longer. But Roger, always the adventurous one, had decided to walk home. He didn't live far, just a few blocks away, down the road and around the corner. "Come on, it's not far," Roger had said, giving him a grin. "I'll be fine, see you tomorrow." David had waved as Roger turned and headed down the gravel driveway, but there was something in the way Roger had looked back, just before disappearing behind the fence. His face had been pale, his eyes wide, but David had been too distracted, too eager to get back to the game, to notice anything strange about it. That was the last time he'd ever seen his best friend. When David's mother called him in for dinner a few hours later, she asked, "Where's Roger?" David had shrugged. "He went home." But then, when he went outside to get the mail, he saw it, the backpack, lying in the grass near the corner of the yard, just a few feet from the picker bush. David didn't think anything of it at first, but when he picked it up, he noticed the dark spots on the fabric, and that's when the air seemed to freeze around him. The spots were blood. David's heart hammered in his chest as he turned the backpack over, his hands shaking. The smell, sharp and metallic, filled his nostrils. His first thought was to run to his mother, to tell her something had happened. But then, he glanced back at the bush, and that's when it hit him. The wind had stopped, the world had gone still, and the thorns of the picker bush, those gnarled, twisting fingers, seemed to be pointing toward him. The police said Roger had been abducted. There was no other explanation. They found no trace of him, no sign of struggle, just the blood on the backpack and a couple of strange footprints that didn't match any known shoe prints. They even questioned David, though he wasn't sure what he could have told them. He hadn't seen anything, no one had. But David knew what had happened. He had felt it. The picker bush had eaten him. It was always at night that David thought about it the most, when the shadows grew long and the trees outside his window stretched their limbs like monstrous fingers. He could hear it then, a faint rustling, as if the bush was breathing, waiting. Every night, the sound of the wind in the branches would come, soft and slow, like a low whisper. One night, unable to sleep, David decided he would prove it. He was going to go out there, to the corner of the yard, and get close enough to the picker bush to see what was really inside. He was sick of feeling like he was losing his mind. He grabbed a flashlight and crept out into the dark. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and something else, something metallic. The light from his flashlight flickered as he approached the bush. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end, but he kept walking, just a few more steps. When he was close enough to touch it, the brush of the thorns against his sleeve felt wrong, like they were tugging, pulling, begging him to come closer. He shone the light deeper into the tangled mass of branches, half expecting to see Roger's face staring back at him, but instead, the shadows seemed to writhe. The wind picked up again, sharp and cold. David's breath caught in his throat, and then, through the thick bramble, he saw it. A hand, no, a claw, emerged from the bushes, long and twisted, covered in dark, wet fur. It was impossibly still, like the bush was holding its breath. David's heart raced. He took a step back, but the bush, no, the thing inside it, seemed to follow him, stretching forward as if it had eyes, as if it had a hunger for him too. David turned and ran, never looking back. He didn't stop until he was back inside his house, trembling in his bedroom, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The sounds of the wind outside grew louder, the rustling more frantic. It was coming for him, he was sure of it. The next morning, David told his mother he was done. He didn't want to live in the house anymore. He didn't care where they went, as long as it wasn't here. His mother had tried to comfort him, to say it was just his imagination, but David didn't believe her. He didn't even believe the police anymore. Roger hadn't been abducted, he'd been eaten. And so, when they left, David could never bring himself to look back. But every time the wind howled through the trees, or the branches of some unfamiliar bush creaked in the distance, David would remember that picker bush, the thing that had taken Roger, the thing that had waited, and watched, and eaten. And David knew, deep down, that it was still out there.